Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on this tourism and hospitality webinar. Hope you and your employees and your families are safe and well. We know that the impacts of coronavirus has been well and truly felt by all across the tourism, travel, hospitality businesses. And the purpose of this webinar is to help support all of our business and give them practical advice at this really needy time. So on the right hand side, you'll see that you can pose some questions, and you can do that anytime throughout the next 45 minutes. And we might even do some polls depending on how we go. Got a superb panel today joining us, but before I do that, I'll just give you a little bit of background. We've been at Marketing Manchester, we've been liaising with our members and organisations like Manchester Hoteliers for the last month, asking them how the impact of analysis affected their business. And we're getting 5 areas basically: cash flow advice for businesses, basic housekeeping, policies and procedures, and that includes all the government support initiatives that have been coming through, staffing, and of course isolation. So that's isolation for our staff and our guests. So that's the focus really. No doubt there's more questions of that, but I'm going to start by asking the panelists just to spend 4 or 5 minutes just talking about the key issues their clients, their members, their contacts have been feeling across those areas, and about some of the advice on those points to deal with. I'm going to take questions in between each of the speakers, and then we're going to have a question session at the end. So 45 minutes, what we're trying to do is cover many issues, and the idea is then the questions that we get most of or most concern, we will then devise other webinars with a bit more specific focus in the future. So if that sounds all right, I'm going to introduce our great panel today. So Kate Nicholls, who's Chief Executive Officer at UKHospitality, and that's the trade body for the hospitality industry with over 700 members representing 70,000 sites in the UK. That's including pubs, coffee shops, hotels, all the rest of it. Secondly, Paul Clark, who is Director UK Business Mentoring at Greater Manchester Federation of Small Businesses. So welcome, Paul. Thirdly, Alison Loveday, partner at Kennedy's, and Alison is an expert in all aspects of employment law at Kennedy's. Kennedy's is a global firm, 58 offices around the world, and Alison has 2 main areas of focus, which I know you'll be interested in: people and business. And then fourthly, Nick Brooks-Sykes, many of you know Nick, Director of Tourism at Marketing Manchester, and Nick also sits on the National Alliance, the National Tourism Alliance, and is also a member of the Core Cities Tourism Group, and is in regular contact, especially in the last month, with DCMS and Visit Britain. So that's the panelists. I'm going to start with Kate. Kate, can you explain, just go through perhaps the top 2 or 3 key issues that your members have been feeling and some practical advice for those key issues, please? Over to Kate.
Can you hear me? I'm hoping you can all hear me.
Loud and clear. Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Sorry. Technophobe, so I've had real troubles with the technology this morning, so apologies for that. Just a quick overview. This has been an unprecedented crisis that we've been facing in the industry. It's also been an unprecedented crisis across government. I've never worked in 30 years, I've never dealt with something that is simultaneously a public health crisis, an economic crisis, a people crisis, and also a global crisis. I think the positive thing is that from travel, tourism and hospitality, government has recognised at an early stage that we are right at the front line and are needing additional support and help to be able to continue to stay in business, and also that we are crucial to the economic recovery when it comes. And the first point I would just say is that, yes, we are heading on a very sharp dip, but the anticipation is that we will also be on a steep incline when we come out of it. So we need to make sure these businesses are fit, healthy and ready to resume trading when we come out of this short-term crisis. So it does seem strange that it is only about 10 days ago that we were having the budget and the first hint that we might need to have interventions from the government to support our businesses. And after 2 or 3 separate announcements, we have some clarity around what help and support might be available. And I imagine that a lot of the conversation today will be around the job recovery scheme that the Chancellor announced on Friday. The top issues for hospitality businesses were, how do you continue trading prior to the closure order when you had a decline of about 70% in footfall and 70% in revenue? How do you keep trading? How do you support your people? And clearly, how can you make sure that you keep those people employed? And we were heading for an existential crisis, which the Chancellor has averted by announcing that there will be a Corona Jobs Recovery Scheme available to people. However, it won't come in until the end of April, and that money won't start flowing through until the end of April. It will be backdated. That's a long time for businesses with no income to continue to survive, and it's a long time for the workers who are hourly paid, and a large proportion of them, and also receive weekly pay to continue supporting their workers and doing what the Chancellor said of making sure they do the right thing. It's going to be quite a frustrating webinar, I think, for a lot of people, because other than what I've just said, there are no real details about what that scheme means, how you apply for it, which workers are covered, what does a furloughed worker mean, what elements of salary are included within the 80% up to a cap of 2,500, and critically, how do you get the money and when does it come through? All of those questions unanswered. The only reassurance I can give is that the government is working at pace to provide those answers, not just to hospitality businesses, but to businesses across the economy. So we will get that information, I would hope, within the next couple of days, at least the big picture detail, and they are working flat out behind the scenes. The second issue is access to finance. We anticipate, having looked at what the Bank of England scheme is for the large companies and the scheme that's available through the business bank for the smaller companies, that around 85%, 90% of hospitality will fall in the middle between the two and will be restricted as to what access they can get to finance. And so therefore there is a very urgent need for banks to relax some of their normal conditions that they would impose on bridging finance to give those people cash flow to get support going to those workers. So there's a need for further flexibility there. And the third part is then around property. An awful lot of these premises will be in leasehold property. We have quarter rent day coming up on Wednesday this week, and businesses are faced with a very stark choice at the moment. Some landlords are being incredibly helpful, incredibly supportive, and incredibly helpful in terms of rent holidays. Others are waiting to see what the government says, but we know we've got a growing crisis where people are going to have a cash flow squeeze and they have to choose paying their landlord or paying their staff. We know we've got help coming through from April. There's no business rate support. We're calling on the government to legislate for a lease moratorium, so that there's a moratorium on leasehold forfeiture if people miss or delay their payment of rent on Wednesday, and that would help to give some breathing space until this vital money for workers comes through. The final part of it, and then I'll stop from my part and move towards questions for in the future, is around further restrictions. I think we can anticipate and should anticipate that there will be further restrictions this week on social distancing, on further businesses that may face closure or partial closure or potential closure, and having to work through what that means, particularly for sole trading businesses, the self-employed, and some of the smaller businesses, second homes, self-catering accommodation, etc., across the sector and across the region. Those are the main issues that we're taking to government. We are in daily contact with the main departments who are dealing with them, and we're the principal sort of funnel point up alongside the Tourism Alliance to make sure that those issues are addressed in a constructive and planned way and a logical way by government. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Kate, for all of that round. As it's moving so fast, and as that announcement was just made on Friday, the follow-up to all of our 110 delegates have just signed into this webinar today. We will be following up with links, but just a couple of questions, Kate, just before I move on. Quite a few of our questions that are coming in are around the 80% workers' salary support, and there's three in particular. perhaps you can help. I know you don't know the detail at the moment. We're getting questions about what do sole traders, home workers do, the timing of that. Some people have heard it won't be till May. And the other one is, what paper trail should any of these businesses be keeping at the moment whilst they wait for more detail?
Okay, well, the first thing to say is that we do anticipate that some of that big detail will come out within the next couple of days in order to allow businesses to make decisions. Home workers, it depends whether they're self-employed home workers or they're home workers as part of a company. If they're part of a company, they will all be covered, as will 0 hours contract workers as well. And we will just have to wait and see. We anticipate that there will be some form of averaging of hours or averaging of pay to calculate that 80%, but they will need to be furloughed. So that will be clearly the case. The challenge, and a lot of the questions I think are hinting at it, is that doesn't help you if you're self-employed and you're the self-employed business owner. And there you will just have to rely on the measures that the government has put out already for the self-employed, which is equivalent to statutory sick pay, £94 a week. Although there are likely to be greater measures for freelancers, gig economy and self-employed coming through later this week that will be separate to that employment package. I hadn't heard anything that suggests it's going to be as late as May. What it is, though, is it's an initial 3-month scheme backdated to the 1st of March. So therefore it would cover March, April and May, but the money will start to flow through at the end of April. So the challenge for a lot of people will be to work out what shape they need their business to be in, which workers are they essentially laying off that will now be furloughed, and how can they continue to support them until that money flows through at the end of April. So it's going to be another cash flow challenge.
Okay, great. Kate, just one more before we leave you. This is really important for you. So grey area with travel restrictions. One of our delegates, Joanna, she owns a self-catering cottage in the Dales. Should she be cancelling guest stays? And if so, what months should she be cancelling? And should she be offering refunds or expecting guests to claim off travel insurance?
This is changing on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So there's new advice that's come out from MHLCG, which is the Department for Communities and Local Government, which deals with second homes, and DCMS around self-catering accommodation. The advice is that people should be not taking leisure bookings. And I think it will be very sensible to contact people who've got leisure bookings between now and end of April, certainly. Some people are looking at May, but end of April, certainly, to talk to the people and say that you know, that they, if they haven't already called you, that you are unlikely to be able to accept their booking. The government was really clear over the weekend that people should not be travelling to these remote areas, and that they would like businesses to be responsible in not accepting and encouraging leisure travel. So I think, you know, if they haven't contacted you, you might want to get in touch with them. You will have your normal refund policies, and also you will also be able to look at postponement and taking the booking later, or reissuing the booking, and it will be your choice and your contract that determines about refund policies and whether you need to refund that money now. That's
great. Lovely. Thanks very much, Kate. So I'm going to move on now to the Federation of Small Businesses, Paul Clark. Paul, could you share, please, with our audience today, what are the key issues that you're hearing from your clients?
Yeah, thanks, Shona. Hopefully you can hear me. Quite a number of the points that Kate's made there are the points from my clients. So I guess if I was summarising and not duplicating some of the answers there, it's cash is king, and doing a 3-month cash flow. And this is an ever-moving situation, and it's for all levels and natures of business, but almost do it on 3 types of cash flow. One on a basis that there is, you know, what your expected income is coming in. One on a basis of 50%, and one on a basis of essentially you're going to get no income. Yeah. Then from an expenditure perspective within that cash flow, look at every part of the expenditure that you've got. So again, Kate was talking about landlords. I know I've heard lots of feedback that landlords, mixed, but lots of landlords are very appreciative of the situation, and I would certainly be speaking to your landlords because ultimately it'll probably take them 12 months to get a new tenant for the business in. So I would be doing that. I'd be looking at every expenditure we've got. From a staff perspective, we know the statutory sick pay, we know the situation with the staff retention scheme. So I'd be looking at all those. I've been looking at the supply chain that you've got, to protect that, because these are suppliers that you will use when we all get through this together. So there is an element of negotiation with the suppliers, but I would, it is that robust cash flow. And a customer today sent me over that and could predict on three cases of their business from a sort of high, low, medium basis what their cash flow was deficit, and actually how they would fund it. So there was an element of grants, there was an element of staff retention scheme, there was an element of VAT and pay as you earn deferral, there was an element of funding from their existing overdrafts, there was an element of etc. etc. So the more you can do that, and also if you do need to go to the bank for additional facilities, and they are very supportive at the moment. They will be looking probably for a few things to highlight. They will want your cash flow. They will probably like an abridged business plan. So what I mean by that is it's just a short snapshot of your business as it was going into this situation, and the impact of the situation on the business and what you're doing, and also then the expectation of how you will continue business afterwards. So it gives them confidence around their lending, from that perspective. Some of those are very difficult, I appreciate fully, to predict or even to estimate at present, but the more you can give the banks and whoever financial services you go into with that sort of package, then it is always good. They will want to know your creditor position as well, from that perspective. The other aspects, I guess, that it's keep in touch with the various sites. So Marketing Manchester, Business Growth Hub, the FSB, we send out a daily. Everybody's sending out lots of information at the moment. So really keep close to the information, because there's lots of excellent information that you can look at. The other aspect that I've been speaking to clients about is actually diversification or opportunities too. So I'm conscious it's the hospitality. So we know that where at the moment restaurants may have a takeaway service, for instance. Some people have an online offering, and it actually allows you to look at potentially ways that you can use your customer base and also your supply chain to help your customers, maybe to even offer initially things for free, but that just keeps your customers, but also to potentially keeping some revenue into the business. I would also say the biggest aspect, Shona, are staff questions. We're getting a lot on the staff retention, sick pay. How do we remote access working? How do we continue to connect with our staff? So again, there are lots of advice on how to use similar facilities like ours. These facilities, not necessarily webinars, but Office Teams, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, where you can connect with your staff, keep them engaged, just even if it's just a social interaction. whilst they may be being at home, or they may be working at home, depend on whether they're on the furloughed side, or they're just actually working from home. So actually that engagement and sort of care to the staff is really, really important, as it to yourself. And the last part I'd say, Shona, is it's actually looking after the owners themselves. So use your network of support mechanism, because actually as a business owner, it's quite often a lonely place. And actually in these circumstances that we've never seen before, it's incredibly testing. So use your network, use your respected contacts and guidance to ensure that you're actually not on your own. And if you need help, ask for absolutely help. Would be is the things I'm starting to talk about. And interestingly, cash flow policies, staff and isolation, you noted them at the start, Shona. They're very similar across with all my clients, and constant conversations.
That's great, Paul. What a great gander through all the key issues there. Just before I ask you a couple of questions, and then I'll go on to Alison, just like to put a poll out in terms of the advice that our audience still wants to hear about. And this would be something that we'd follow up further on down the line with another few webinars. So, and there's 5 I'm going to ask to put in the poll. So James is on standby to do this for me, I hope. So I'm going to put a poll: what advice you still want about cash flow and business continuity, basic housekeeping, the supplies, etc., supply chain, policies, procedures, and the government support to keep jobs and retention, staffing, and also something about isolation and dealing with hotel guests going forward. So they're the 5 issues. If James can put a poll out on that, people can vote on that. Just before I leave you, Paul, there's 2 questions that come up. So let me just look. It was from Samantha. Will CJRS, so the retention scheme, will that include pension coverage and national insurance? And there's another question from Catherine. Santander Bank advised that they use the overdraft up first before applying for the loan scheme. And how would this affect their credit rating? Because they would have to contact the collections team, and that would be able to process the interruption loan. If you can answer those, great. If not, I'll ask, and we can go back to Samantha and Catherine separately.
Thanks, Shona. Certainly on the Santander or the credit situation, my understanding is obviously your credit rating, it will be affected by anything detrimental to it. So obviously unauthorized overdrafts or things like that. So actually using a facility will not affect it. I've got the right part of the question there. Using a facility will not, but my steer on this is keep the bank informed. And I actually say this to my clients, actually outside this situation, actually have regular updates with your clients. So keep the bank informed, and because they do have additional capacity or sort of appeal, for want of a better word, at the moment, with some shadow limits, I know that will support businesses on request. So it's better to request something, get something agreed, than go over a limit that will certainly potentially affect a credit scoring. Clearly the pension and the national insurance, that's not a question I've come across, Shona, to be perfectly honest. So I don't know the answer. I suspect it is 80% of wages, but I actually don't know the question, because to a certain extent the national insurance, they may put that retrospectively. I don't know so actually
perhaps
the answer
that's something
to that.
we can all follow up on and put in our data sheets to follow up this session. Yeah, great, lovely, thanks, Paul. I will come back to you. So I'm now going to hand over to Alison Loveday. Just to remind you, Alison's from Kennedy's legal firm, and she has 2 specialisms, people and business. So Alison.
Hi, good afternoon. So a number of the aspects have obviously been covered already. So I'll just try to cover the same points, but maybe some additional aspects that we haven't covered in the session so far. So I think the first thing I'd highlight is communication. I think it's absolutely essential right now that everybody probably feels like over communicating, but it's really important that that level of communication goes right through your business, from your bank, your landlord, your supply chain, your staff. We're not going to be able to see people in the way that we used to. So whether that's documenting things by email, putting in the calls, but it is really important that we keep the lines of communication open. I've said a few times on previous webinars that we're all in a bit of a tin hat time at the moment, which is understandable given what's going on, but we do need to have an eye to the future. So all of the people that you're currently relying on and working with in your business, you're likely to want to need in the future. So calling in a few favours if you have to, giving some, being a bit more accommodating, I think is going to really come back and benefit you, I hope. I think it also illustrates the degree of cooperation that the government is expecting to happen between businesses and landlords and banks. I think it really is at such a high level, and it will be interesting to see if everybody actually comes up to the mark. I mean, I understand from business owners' points of view, if they need funding, there is going to be some nervousness and reluctance about taking on additional loans. So I think it's really important that the government schemes for grants and loans are really explained well. We're only just getting information out this week about how people can apply, but they really need to understand what it means for them. If the government's backing up a loan and making the interest payments now for 12 months, originally it was 6, but now it's 12, what does that actually mean? When they do their cash flow, is that going to get them out of the hole that they need? Do they need to re-look at their business in the meantime and come up with a new model? That may require less people, it may require different things, but it's important that all of that is looked at. One of my key areas, which Shona mentioned, is people. And I have to say, last week was just depressing, really. On the one hand, very uplifting on the other, when you looked at the new ways people were, being very creative in to turn their business round. We had lots of people doing things online that they'd never have thought about. Even I think baby yoga was one of them, which is not what you would expect. But in terms of the people, the main thing was really, particularly for those in hospitality who are hourly paid, perhaps with minimum hours contracts, the fall off in trade meant that business owners were having to consider initially layoffs and redundancies, and then very quickly closures. We've now had the obviously welcome news for support with salaries, but you'll have gathered from the previous speakers, we're really very, very short on detail as to how that's going to work. I've already been asked, well, is that a gross payment? Is it net payment, 2,500? What you're supposed to do in the meantime? Can people effectively get benefits like universal credit? Is that help going to be available? I think for business owners, they really need to look at, well, what staff do they actually need? How are they going to select which members of staff are furloughed? If that's even a word. And what does that mean? Does it mean that people can work in the business? It looks as if they can't, so they won't be able to work. So if they've got no income coming in and they've got to wait until the end of April, are they going to really hang around and wait? So I think it sounds good in theory because you would want to retain your staff, but I think we need to understand practically what that means for people. And I think for business owners, they really need to understand what their obligations will be. So if they have staff who are furloughed for, if we say for the 3 months that the scheme's set up at the moment, if at the end of that, what happens if they need to make them redundant then, because their business model is looking very different. So I think it's thrown up as many questions as it's answered, really. And I think just before I finish, I would just highlight really some particularly vulnerable groups within the workforce. So we've already mentioned those either pregnant or older workers or underlying health issues who maybe already are having to self-isolate. Can they work from home? That's not always possible in the hospitality trade. It's more frontline. So are they going to get paid whilst they're off? I think another area is those that get accommodation with their job. If there's a closure and or they're potentially either laid off or furloughed, will their accommodation go with their job? And also, I started off talking about communication. I've personally got an association with the Literacy Trust, and I think it's really telling that it's really very helpful that lots of information is being made available and sent out, but we need to remember those people who are not necessarily going to be able to access that easily. Similarly, not necessarily going to be able to access some of the benefits easily. So we need to think about making sure it does reach the most vulnerable in our society. And that was it, but I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. There's quite a few questions that have come up. So just before I put to you, Victoria, thank you so much. As many of our audience today, we've got some really lovely suggestions coming in. So if we can capture them, perhaps at the end, we can capture them through James, our administrator, for this webinar. That would be great. So Victoria, thanks for those different protocols, different ways of keeping informed with staff. We'd love to hear from them. A few questions Joanna has posed. Can staff be furloughed and then volunteer their services to the same business? And also grants for charities and creative arts. So Alison, can you throw any light on those two questions? And then I'll pass to Paul for those two questions as well.
Yeah, I think it sounds like a good idea, the volunteering. We really don't know enough about furloughing. The reality is that it would be a variation of individuals' contracts of employment anyway. So obviously the normal thing is you've got a place of work probably cited in your contract. You may have got some set hours, and it's clear how that contract is supposed to operate on a day-to-day. The reality is that can't happen for all sorts of reasons. And what we're really asking people to do, and if furlough is adopted, it means you go home, you can't work for that employer, and the government will step in with that effective guarantee on salary. My gut feel is it probably won't allow volunteering, because that would go against the nature of the scheme, because it's supposed to be where you're not able to go in and do your job. But let's see how it transpires. As I said, we've only just had it announced on Friday, and it's quite late on Friday, and it's very, very sparse on detail. So I'll wait to see what they come back with. And sorry, I've forgotten what the second question was, Shona.
So the second question was about, are there any grants specifically for charities? So we've heard lots about business, so charities or creative arts, heritage sector.
Well, I know that there is a local authority hardship grant that's been set up. So I think the local authority is probably the first port of call. And if you're not eligible for any of those grants, then we could look at the grants that are being made available by the British banks, but it's not clear that they've got money set aside, so far as I'm aware, specifically for charities.
Okay, thank you. We've just had a response from one of our audience, Victoria. Thank you, that she's had legal advice that volunteering is fine. So if we can check that out and then confirm that would be good for everyone.
Yeah, I think it would be fine for another business, but I think it's really not clear, because furloughing doesn't even have a legal meaning really at the moment. I mean, they may bring in legislation to introduce that, but right here and now it doesn't.
Yeah. I don't know how many other people looked up the dictionary for furloughing this morning.
Yeah.
Okay, great, Alison. I'll come back to you in a minute. Paul, okay. Can you add anything else to those questions?
Yeah, I guess to sort of agree with it, the only other point that I was going to make, and I'm just looking at Kerry's question on the should we be keeping staff on the books and paying 100%. So the discussions I've had with a number of clients where the furlough, the definition, which does need expanding, is every business should have got the email Friday night from the government around two aspects. One, the staff retention scheme, how does it affect businesses, and then how does it affect individuals? If you click on how does it affect individuals, it is quite clear that it says you shouldn't be working while you're at home. Practicality of that is potentially, if you are paying, which is what a number of my clients have decided to pay, sort of 100%, then effectively there is an element of the employer is paying for that wage. Now, I have a view that to also keep, and this is just a personal view, not a legal view, or to keep staff's mental well-being in a good shape. I think a lot of staff, from speaking to customers, have wanted to carry on some normality with life and work from home where it's appropriate. So, as Alison said, it's the rules will be, I am sure, in the coming days, but certainly if you're paying 100% of salary, you are paying 20% of the salary. So there is an opportunity there to discuss that with the staff. Regarding was the second question was charities, wasn't it? Without repeating, I guess there's two key questions that have been constantly asked over the course of the last few days. How do sole traders, self-employed directors, where's the support for them other than within this scheme? Where's it specifically for them from an income perspective, and charities, because of the impact it has on charities at the moment with donations. Having been, I'm personally a volunteer at a local hospice, and very frustrated that I can't continue to support my hospice directly at the moment, just indirectly. So I don't know if that was the question, actually. I've just got a side question there.
No, that's great. Thanks, Paul. So I think we'll move on now to our last speaker. So Nick Brooksykes, Director of Tourism at Marketing Manchester. Nick, if you could cover the main issues. Lots of questions here, all different questions about cancellation policies, group travel, should we be travelling, and supply chain, but we'll pick up those. So over to Nick just to cover the main issues from your perspective.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I think I'm not in a position to give you specific advice, unlike both Paul and Alison, who are qualified specialists. I think what we've been trying to do at Marketing Manchester is make sure that the information as it comes out from government is all in one place, so that it's easy for you to assimilate and digest, really. So we have set up on the Marketing Manchester website a portal which pulls together frequently asked questions and also signposts people to further advice as it becomes available from government. And you'll realise already from both Paul and Alison that a lot of the detail behind some of these announcements is still to be announced or to be worked through, not least around the 80% funding for staff who are furloughed, really, and also guidance on whether people can or cannot travel. And we're expecting a further announcement on travel restrictions to come out from government this week, really. So in an ever-changing field where possibly today's advice isn't quite enough, and hopefully tomorrow's advice will have some detail, Marketing Manchester has pulled together a hub of advice. So if you click on marketingmanchester.com, you'll get very quickly to the pages which are all around coronavirus. And there's a wealth of information there which draws together lots of different sources and hopefully answers the questions that you're seeking answers to, if it's available. And if it's not available, then the chances are we've not found that advice and that specific answers to those questions yet. We've also set up a support hub mechanism. So if you wanted to ask specific questions, or if you want to share best practice, or get in contact with other businesses dealt with specific issues, or if you've got resources that you want to share with other businesses, then if you email supporthub@Marketing Manchester, then we will take all of those emails and respond to them appropriately. So there's a website at marketingmanchester.com, and there's an email address at supporthub@marketingmanchester.com for you to make use of, and to find out what's going on a regular basis. That both the website is updated on a daily basis as more information becomes available. And I'd urge you just to keep checking back there. But equally, if you don't get the answer there, then the email address is on that website for you to get in contact with us. And we'll endeavour where possible to point you in the right direction. I think during these early days, a lot of the devil is in the detail. And hopefully over the next few days, we should be starting to find some of the detail out around how some of these schemes will be working. So yes, that's an update from Marketing Manchester.
That's great. Thank you, Nick. So the website to look at is marketingmanchester.com. I'm just going to go back to our panelists just one more time before we wrap up, just to say how things are looking, looking to the future, if any of us can. Quite a few of the questions today have been about how long will this last? It's just some perspective on that. But we will be putting all the helpful resources. We've just put them up on the screen now, and that's available on the Marketing Manchester website. We are part of the Growth Company. And so along with other colleagues that deal with skills and business support and employment, we're setting up a lot of new services. We're looking at how we help national health workers and accommodation, matching them up. We're already working on in terms of mass redeployment of staff. So any questions, or any advice, that's the place to come in terms of the tourism point of view, is Marketing Manchester. But as I said, we've got the wider resources of the Growth Company. So we've got 2 minutes just to wrap up. So Alison and Paul, can I just go back to you? Firstly, Alison, just to wrap up, any final thoughts? And, in terms of either what's going to happen over the next 3 to 6 months and what to watch out for?
Yeah, I think I echo Paul's advice earlier about having a really, really good look at your business plan and your cash flow. My understanding is that if you want to apply for one of the business interruption loans, you will need to be able to demonstrate that you had a viable business and that you'll have a viable business once the virus has passed. So I think this is an opportunity for people to really take a very hard look at their business and see, how they can survive the current pressures, but also look at what business might look like. As you say, we don't know the exact timescale, but it may be that we come out of the immediate pressure, but we're still in a very changed environment for quite a few months. I think that's, a lot of crystal ball gazing, but I think it's something we need to have the discipline to do. And I think throughout that period, it's then a case of speaking to your suppliers, your bankers, your landlords, your staff, and being as honest and transparent as you can be. I think everybody appreciates that we won't have all the answers, but at least showing that you're doing your best to try and anticipate things, I think, is probably the best you can think of.
Yeah, good advice. Thank you, Alison. And Paul, we've got 20 seconds just to give any final points.
Just very quickly, because I saw the question about email. That email's, Kerry, is the fourth one down on the link that you've just sent, which is the guidance to employers and businesses about COVID-19. I'd echo everything for Alison. Good, just whilst it's a terrible situation we're in at the moment, there is an opportunity just to reset, look at the opportunities when we get out of this for supporting, running your business and growing your business. And at the moment, clearly that's hard to see. But and the other thing I would say, if you get an opportunity to help others, because this is where we've almost adopted the catchphrase by accident. Together we'll all get through this. And I know it's a bit corny, but I genuinely think society and business will.
Great, lovely. Thanks, Paul. Great words to end up in. Just to look at the poll, more than half of you want more information on cash flow and business continuity, especially just to digest all of those impacts on the government's announcements over the last few days. So we will be back with another webinar and some more information going forward. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks to our speakers, so Alison, Paul, Kate and Nick. Thanks all for joining us, and we'll be back soon. Stay safe and take care of each other. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.